My name is Taylor Monroe. I'm 30 years old and I live in a small apartment just a couple of hours from the horse ranch in Kentucky where I grew up. For the last 6 years, I've funneled almost every extra dollar I earned into paying off one thing, the $860,000 mortgage on my parents' ranch. I kept it quiet month after month, watching the balance drop, while I skipped vacations, drove the same old car, and turned down everything that wasn't absolutely necessary. I always pictured the day the final payment cleared. Maybe a quiet family dinner on the porch, or at least my parents finally saying they knew what I'd done to keep the place from going to the bank. Instead, I got a phone call from my brother Travis. He skipped the small talk completely. "I know you paid off the mortgage," he said, voice flat. "All 860,000. But Mom and Dad are gifting the entire ranch to Brooke as her engagement present to Ethan." I stood there in my kitchen phone, pressed to my ear, waiting for the part where he said he was joking. It never came. He kept going. "And you're not invited to the engagement party. We don't want you bringing any negative energy on her big day." My throat went dry. I'd spent 6 years working extra shifts, eating cheap meals, and pouring my life into that ranch so it wouldn't be lost. And now I was the one with the bad attitude. I asked if he was serious. He told me to stop making everything about money, that family should just be happy for each other, and then he hung up. I sat at the table listening to the dial tone until it cut off. Then I looked across the room at the only person who knew every detail of what I'd been doing and said, "You want to tell them. Or should I?" A week later, Brooke's engagement party didn't turn out to be the perfect celebration they planned. If you've ever felt like the invisible one in your own family, the one who carries the heaviest load while everyone else takes the credit and still paints you as the problem, do me a favor right now. Hit the like button and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Your support helps more people see the truth about what goes down when the responsible sibling finally stops staying quiet and starts standing up for themselves. Before I tell you how that whole day fell apart, let me take you back to how this all started. There was a time when news like that would have crushed me, and I'd still show up smiling, pretending everything was fine. That habit didn't come out of nowhere. I grew up on that horse ranch in rural Kentucky, the one constant backdrop to every memory I have. It wasn't anything fancy to outsiders, just rolling fields, old barns, and the smell of hay and leather, but it was home. My parents tied their whole identity to keeping that land in the family. Dad ran the place like it was his legacy, talking about it like he was the only one holding everything together. Mom kept the house running, cooked for everyone, and smoothed over arguments when they came up. With me, they always assumed I'd figure things out on my own. With my younger sister, they assumed the world would open doors for her just because she was the baby of the family. By the time I was in my teens, I'd learned not to expect much. If there was money for new riding gear or show fees, it went to her first. If someone got to go on a trip, it wasn't me. I adapted. I studied hard, picked up every part-time job I could, and built a life that didn't rely on them handing me anything. When I moved out and started working full-time, that pattern only got stronger. I rented cheap places, saved where I could, and told myself independence was worth more than whatever help they might have offered. Back on the ranch, things started sliding. The horse market took hits, vet bills piled up. Feed costs went through the roof, and a couple of rough seasons meant fewer sales. The mortgage payments fell behind. Late notices stacked up. My parents never came right out and asked for help, but the stress leaked into every phone call. One weekend when I drove back to visit, I opened the wrong kitchen drawer and found a thick stack of unopened envelopes from the bank. Holding them, I realized how close they were to losing everything. It would have been easy to close the drawer, get in my car, and drive away. Instead, I went to my old room, sat on the bed, and ran the numbers. I knew what I made, what I could cut, and how long it would take if I threw most of my paycheck at that loan. My own life would stall, raises and promotions would go straight to someone else's property, but I did it anyway. The transfers started quietly. Every month, money left my account and shaved down a debt that wasn't even in my name. Dad kept talking to neighbors and friends about how he was fighting to hold on to the family ranch, how much he'd sacrificed. Mom thanked me in small ways when I visited a home-cooked meal or a quick hug, but she never pushed him to admit where the payments were really coming from. I told myself it was enough just knowing they wouldn't wake up to a foreclosure notice one morning. For years, the routine was narrow work pay bills make the big transfer feel that small relief when the balance dropped another notch. I kept thinking once the debt was gone, things would feel different, closer to respect, instead of just duty. From my apartment, I watched the Kentucky seasons change outside my window, winter snow giving way to spring green, summer heat, fall colors then bare again. Each cycle matched another bank statement I filed away. On weekends, I'd drive back. The ranch looked the same, from the road fences needing paint, barn roof holding up horses grazing. Inside the house, though, the gap kept growing. Dad's stories got louder about his determination to keep the place. My part stayed buried. Then my sister got engaged, and everything in that house suddenly revolved around her future and the perfect start they wanted to give the new couple. By then, the mortgage was almost cleared. I knew exactly how many payments were left. I still hoped for some kind of honest moment when it was over. What I got was that phone call from my brother and the clear message that my years of work were about to be handed over like they'd never happened. That was the moment I stopped waiting for them to do the right thing on their own. The ranch was the only real home I ever knew. Wide pastures stretched out under big Kentucky skies, old wooden barns creaked in the wind, and you could hear horses whinnying from the fields first thing in the morning. Those early rides before school, the smell of fresh hay, the rhythm of hooves on dirt trails, it all stuck with me long after I left. My father, Richard Monroe, treated the place like it defined him. He ran the horse operation with this stubborn pride, always talking about how he was the one keeping the family legacy alive no matter what it took. My mother, Diane Monroe, stayed in the background, more handling the cooking, cleaning, and making sure arguments didn't last too long. She had this way of stepping in just enough to keep the peace. Then there was my brother Travis Monroe, who got a lot of the focus growing up. He was the one they pushed toward taking over one day, helping him with equipment or entry fees for local shows. My younger sister Brooke Monroe was the baby, pretty and dreamy, always talking about bigger things outside the ranch. She got the new clothes, the extra lessons, the encouragement to chase whatever caught her eye. I figured out pretty young that things worked differently for me. If money was tight and something had to be cut, it was usually whatever I needed. New boots for riding competitions, Brooke got them. Help with college applications or gas money, Travis came first. I never made a big deal out of it. Instead, I picked up shifts at the local feed store after school, saved what I could from birthdays or odd jobs around neighboring farms, and made sure I didn't have to ask. By the time I graduated high school, I was ready to get out. I moved to an apartment in a nearby city where the jobs paid better, started building a career in admin work that could turn into something steady. I kept things simple, shared rent when I had to buy groceries on sale, and focused on standing on my own. Visits back to the ranch became less frequent, but I still drove out every few months to check in. Meanwhile, the horse business started hitting rough patches. Prices for good stock dropped after a couple of big breeding farms flooded the market. Vet bills for injuries or illnesses added up fast, and feed costs kept climbing with bad weather ruining hay crops. A string of dry summers and wet winters meant fewer foals survived or sold well. The ranch had always carried a mortgage from when my parents expanded years earlier, and now those payments were getting harder to cover. They never said it outright, but I could hear the worry creeping into their voices during phone calls. Dad would brush it off with talk about tightening belts. Mom would change the subject to something lighter. I told myself it would turn around. Ranches go through cycles. One weekend, I came home unannounced to help with some fencing Dad mentioned needed fixing. While grabbing coffee in the kitchen, I pulled open a drawer looking for spoons and saw a thick stack of envelopes jammed in the back. Bank logo on every one, all unopened edges worn like they'd been shoved there and ignored. I stood frozen for a minute, then took the stack to the table and slit them open one by one. Late notices, warnings about missed payments, threats of acceleration on the full balance. The numbers were brutal. They were months behind, and the total outstanding was climbing fast with fees. I sat there staring at the papers spread out in front of me. The ranch wasn't just behind, it was on the edge of foreclosure. All those fields, the barns we'd repaired together, the house where we'd grown up, it could all be gone soon. Part of me thought about putting everything back, pretending I hadn't seen it, heading out to fix the fence like nothing was wrong. They hadn't asked for help after all. But the idea of them losing the only place they'd ever known hit hard. I carried the envelopes upstairs to my old bedroom, the one that still had faded horse posters on the walls. Sitting on the edge of the bed, I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app, then a calculator. I listed my monthly take-home rent, car payment, groceries, everything I spent. Then I looked at what was left and started running scenarios. If I cut streaming services, ate out, less, skipped the occasional weekend trips with coworkers, and redirected every raise or bonus, I could cover a big chunk. It wouldn't be easy, and it would stretch on for years, but the math worked. The ranch could stay in the family. I closed the app, put the envelopes in my bag to scan later for exact figures, and went downstairs like nothing had changed. That day marked the real beginning of everything that followed. The next few years settled into a pattern I hadn't expected when I first made the choice. I made the choice right there in my old room and never told a soul in the family. Starting the next paycheck, I set up automatic transfers straight to the mortgage account. Most of my take-home went toward it, leaving just enough for rent and basics. The sacrifices added up quick. I took on extra hours at the office whenever they were offered, staying late most evenings and picking up weekend shifts when I could. Groceries became simple rice, beans, whatever was on sale, no more grabbing coffee on the go or eating out with coworkers. My car was already old when I started, so I kept driving it, fixing small things myself and ignoring the rattles. Vacations were out of the question. No weekend getaways, no flights to see friends in other states. Nothing that cost more than gas for the drive back to Kentucky. Big purchases stopped completely. New clothes, only when something wore out. Furniture stayed secondhand, and I skipped things like upgrading my phone or getting better internet at home. Every dollar saved went into that loan. When I visited the ranch, nothing looked different on the surface. The barns stood solid, pastures stayed fenced, horses moved between paddocks like always. But I'd overhear Dad talking to suppliers or neighbors at the gate, boasting about how his determination kept everything afloat through the lean years. He'd go on about cutting costs himself, working longer days, making tough calls to stay in the black. It stung hearing him take full credit, but I stayed quiet. Mom noticed more than she let on. On those visits, she'd pull me aside for a quiet dinner in the kitchen after everyone else ate, serving my favorite dishes without making a fuss. She'd give me a longer hug or slip an extra dessert onto my plate, small ways of saying thanks. Still, she never confronted Dad about the truth or pushed him to acknowledge where the money was coming from. I didn't bring it up either. I told myself the ranch staying in the family was enough reward, that keeping them from losing everything mattered more than getting recognition. Deep down, I held on to the idea that once the balance hit zero, they'd figure it out, and things would shift. The years blurred together. I tracked progress through the banking app, logging in after every transfer to watch the principal shrink. Statements came electronically now, neat rows of numbers showing steady declines. Winters meant scraping ice off my windshield before early shifts, checking the balance on cold mornings for that small boost. Springs brought longer days at work, more overtime to throw at the loan. Summers were brutal, with the office AC barely keeping up, but I'd see bigger chunks come off after bonuses. Falls gave a breather, leaves changing, while I budgeted even tighter for the holidays. Each visit home showed subtle improvements they attributed to better sales or smarter management. New hay equipment appeared one year, fence repairs got done another. Dad's stories grew about how close they'd come, but pulled through on grit alone. Mom's quiet gestures continued, a care package sent to my apartment sometimes, or a text checking if I needed anything. She knew, but we never spoke it out loud. I stuck to the plan, cutting corners wherever possible. No concerts, no new hobbies that cost money, no joining friends on trips. My apartment stayed basic, one bedroom with minimal furniture, everything functional. Work promotions came, and instead of celebrating with a nicer place or a better car, the raises went straight to extra payments. I negotiated harder bills down, switched insurers for small savings, anything to free up more. The routine became second nature. Payday meant immediate transfer, then relief seeing the update process. I avoided thinking too far ahead, focusing on the next drop in the total owed. 6 years in, the remaining balance was small enough that I could count the final payments on one hand. That's when Brooke announced her engagement, and the whole dynamic at the ranch started tilting even further. My Aunt Victoria Hayes was the only person who knew everything from the start. She's Mom's sister, lives a couple of counties over, and has always kept a close eye on family matters without getting too involved day to day. One weekend when I was back helping with spring vaccinations, she pulled me aside after dinner and asked straight out how I was covering the payments. I tried brushing it off at first, but she wasn't having it. She'd noticed the ranch stabilizing in ways that didn't match the sales Dad reported, and she put the pieces together. Victoria sat me down at her kitchen table the next day and laid it out clear. I was carrying the whole load with no protection if something went wrong. She worried that if Dad ever decided to sell or transfer the property, or if anything happened to them, my name wouldn't be anywhere official. All those years of payments could end up meaning nothing legally. Victoria didn't let it drop. When the mortgage was at its worst, right after a bad year where they almost missed multiple payments in a row, she drove over and sat with Mom and Dad for hours. She brought a lawyer friend who specialized in family properties and explained a trust structure that would tie the ranch to the person actually keeping it afloat. Dad resisted at first, hating anything that felt like admitting weakness. Mom stayed quiet but listened. Victoria pushed the point that it was just smart planning a way to protect the legacy from banks or bad luck. Eventually they agreed, mostly because the bank was breathing down their necks, and the trust helped restructure things to avoid immediate foreclosure. The papers got signed one afternoon in the living room. My name went in as the primary contributor and future controlling interest, since the payments traced back to my accounts. The lawyer made it clear any major change in ownership would need my approval. I didn't fight for that part. At the time, I honestly didn't care about controlling anything. I just wanted the ranch safe and the family intact. The trust felt like extra paperwork, not something I'd ever use. Victoria signed as a witness and kept copies. She told me later she insisted on those clauses because she didn't trust Dad to give credit where it was due if push came to shove. I thanked her, but I filed it away and went back to the routine. Things stayed steady until the remaining balance got small enough to see the end. I was down to counting the last few transfers when Brooke called, one evening, voice excited in a way I hadn't heard in years. She'd met someone, Ethan Caldwell, and they were engaged after dating less than a year. The call lasted forever, all about the ring, the proposal spot, and how perfect he was for her future plans. Within days, the family focus shifted completely. Mom started texting about dress ideas and venue options almost daily. Dad talked about how this was the fresh start the ranch needed, tying it to the next generation properly. Every conversation turned to wedding details. Mom asked if I'd come home for engagement photos, wanting the whole family together for the save the dates. Dad described the party they were planning on the property as the real turning point for the place, a celebration of moving forward after hard times. Brooke posted constantly online about her excitement, tagging Ethan in everything. Travis jumped in with ideas for the setup, offering to handle decorations or whatever needed doing. Phone calls home became one-topic events. If I tried steering toward anything else, it circled right back to centerpieces or guest lists. Mom would apologize quickly but then dive into another question about dates or catering. I listened, offered congratulations when it fit, and kept my own updates short. Work was fine. Apartment was fine. Nothing much new. The shift felt sharper than before. All the energy that used to go into day-to-day ranch operations now poured into making Brooke's engagement the biggest thing the family had done in years. The party date got set fast for a weekend the following month. That Friday evening, I loaded my car and headed back to Kentucky. I pulled onto the long gravel drive and saw cars lined up along both sides more than I expected. String lights draped the front porch and wrapped around fence posts leading to the main barn. A big banner stretched across the entrance read, "Congratulations, Brooke and Ethan," in bright letters. Music played from speakers set up on the lawn, country mixes with laughter floating over it. Tables covered in checkered cloths held trays of barbecue salads and desserts. Relatives I hadn't seen in years milled around with plastic cups, hugging and catching up. Aunts and cousins kept saying how perfect the ranch would be for a young couple starting out. They talked about the space for future kids to run the barns for hobbies, the house already feeling like home. Several mentioned pictures they'd seen online of similar properties turned into dream spots after weddings. Brooke moved through the crowd in a white sundress, Ethan at her side the whole time. He shook hands, smiled wide, fitting in like he'd always belonged. Travis helped direct parking and kept refilling coolers, looking proud in his role. Mom spotted me near the gate and waved me over for quick hugs, with a few relatives introducing me as our oldest before steering conversations back to Brooke's ring or the proposal story. Dad waited until most guests gathered near the fire pit area. He clinked a spoon against his bottle to get attention, standing tall the way he did when addressing buyers at sales. He started with thanks for everyone coming out, then launched into how tough the last several years had been. He described late nights worrying about Bill's decisions to sell off stock, choices that kept the ranch alive through sheer will. Guests nodded along, some murmuring agreement. He painted the picture of pulling through on grit, never once mentioning outside help. Then he smiled broad and announced the real reason for the party beyond the engagement. The ranch, he said, would become Brooke and Ethan's as their engagement gift, a solid foundation for their married life and the family's future. Cheers went up. People clapped, raised cups, congratulated the couple on the spot. Brooke teared up. Ethan thanked everyone. Travis slapped him on the back. No one looked my way. No one asked how the place had actually stayed afloat or brought up the payments that made the announcement possible. I stood off to the side near a hay bale table, drink in hand I hadn't touched. Relatives drifted past, chatting about renovations Brooke might want for the main house, where to put guest rooms, how the pastures could host future events. A few mentioned moving timelines, assuming the handover would happen soon after the wedding. Others offered help with painting or landscaping once the couple settled in. My Aunt Victoria stayed close to the edges too, watching quietly. At one point, she moved next to Dad during a lull and spoke low about the protective paperwork still in place. He brushed it off with a wave, saying it was just technical stuff. Everyone understood the intent behind. She didn't push further in front of guests, but her expression stayed tight. I listened to plans forming around me for a house I'd kept standing. Conversations flowed about furniture Brooke wanted in the living room, Ethan's ideas for expanding the stables, parties they'd host on the porch. The evening wore on with toasts and dancing on the grass. I smiled when spoken to, nodded at compliments about how nice the property looked, kept my responses short. By the time fireworks went off over the back field, the message felt clear. The ranch had a new story now, one that started fresh with Brooke and Ethan. Summer rolled in a few weeks later, bringing the usual family picnic tradition by the river. The river spot we always used for the annual picnic sat just a short drive from the ranch, shaded by old oaks, with gravel access for parking. Folding tables and coolers lined the bank. Kids ran around tossing frisbees, and grills smoked with burgers and corn. Most conversations stayed on one track. Cousins asked Brooke about wedding timelines and how soon she and Ethan planned to move into the main house full-time. Uncles joked about expanding the guest list once the couple took over hosting duties. A few aunts shared tips on updating kitchens in older ranch homes without losing charm. Talk circled back often to daily life on the property. People discussed morning routines with coffee on the porch, evening rides after work, raising animals as a family. Ethan described ideas he had for modernizing the office space in one of the outbuildings. Brooke added details about decorating the bedrooms. My brother Travis retold the familiar version whenever a new group joined the circle. He emphasized Dad's sacrifices, the tight years when everything hung by a thread, and how pure stubbornness kept the land from slipping away. Relatives listened impressed, some patting him on the shoulder for carrying the story forward. I kept a thin folder in my bag the whole time, copies of the trust documents Victoria had given me years earlier. I'd reviewed them again the night before, highlighting sections that listed my contributions and the control clauses tied to them. Lunch settled everyone around the long picnic tables. Plates got passed, drinks refilled, and the chatter slowed while people ate. That's when I pulled the folder out. I set it on the table in front of me, opened to the key pages, and waited for a natural pause. Then I spoke calm and direct. I explained that the ranch wasn't free to transfer like a simple gift because of the trust set up when things were at their worst. My name appeared as the primary party responsible for the payments that cleared the debt, which meant major decisions including ownership changes required my sign-off. Silence dropped fast. Forks stopped moving. A few relatives leaned in to glance at the papers. Mom shifted first, suggesting we save business talk for another time and focus on enjoying the day. She reached for the salad bowl like changing the subject could erase what I'd said. Travis jumped in quicker, calling it just legal formalities everyone already knew about, nothing that changed the family's intentions. He insisted the spirit of the documents matched what Dad wanted for Brooke. But questions started anyway. One cousin asked about the date on the trust and why it was structured that way. An uncle wanted to know if the lawyer had explained options back then. Another relative wondered out loud how the payments had actually flowed. No one raised voices, but the easy flow broke. Responses came clipped or avoided eyes. Brooke stared at her plate. Ethan stayed quiet beside her. Victoria sat across from me and didn't say much, just nodded when someone glanced her way for confirmation. She'd seen the originals often enough. The mood never recovered. People finished eating faster, started packing leftovers earlier than usual. Kids got rounded up chairs, folded trash gathered. Goodbyes felt rushed at the cars. Hugs were shorter, conversations trailed off without the usual lingering. I drove away with the folder on the passenger seat, windows down, river air still in my clothes. Only a week passed before things escalated further. A county vehicle pulled up the drive mid-morning, dust kicking behind it. Two officials in plain uniforms stepped out, clipboards in hand, and knocked on the main door. Dad answered, expecting some routine inspection. They handed over sealed envelopes and explained the visit in neutral tones. A formal dispute had been filed on the trust tied to the property. Until resolved, no transfers of title or major ownership changes could proceed. The planned gift to Brooke was on hold indefinitely. Mom stood behind him in the hallway, face tightening as she read over his shoulder. Travis came in from the barn, wiping hands on a rag, asking what was going on. The officials stayed professional, no opinions offered, just the facts from the records. They noted the filing date and contact for questions, then left as quietly as they arrived. Later that afternoon, a tow truck rolled in without warning. Ethan's leased pickup parked near the equipment shed got hooked up fast. The driver cited missed payments and repossession orders from the finance company. Ethan argued from the porch phone to ear, trying to sort it, but the truck was gone within minutes. Brooke watched from the window, arms crossed tight. I got the call from Victoria that evening confirming everything was in motion. The next day, I met attorney Marcus Bennett at his office downtown. He reviewed the trust copies one last time, nodded at the clauses, and said we were ready. Victoria joined us there, bringing her own set of originals. We drove out to the ranch together in separate cars, Marcus leading. When we arrived, the family was gathered in the living room. Dad opened the door, expression hard. Mom hovered nearby. Travis and Brooke stood further back, Ethan beside her, looking unsettled. Marcus stepped forward, first introduced himself calmly, and laid the documents on the kitchen table where everyone could see. He pointed to specific sections without raising his voice. The trust remained active. My contributions as the primary payer established controlling interest. Any attempt to bypass that for transfer or sale triggered review and potential freeze, which had now happened. He stated plain, I held veto power on ownership changes. The county notice was only the start. Full enforcement meant securing the asset until terms were met. Dad started objecting, voice rising about family intentions overriding paperwork. Marcus cut in politely but firm, reminding him the agreement was signed voluntarily when options were limited. Mom tried appealing directly to me, asking if this was really necessary. Couldn't we talk it out? Her eyes pleaded, but the words sounded tired. Travis accused me of overreacting, turning a technicality into punishment. Brooke added that it ruined everything they'd planned, voice cracking. Ethan stayed silent, mostly shifting weight, glancing at exits. Victoria spoke little, just confirmed dates and signatures when Marcus referenced them. Marcus outlined next steps. A locksmith was scheduled that afternoon to change all exterior locks for security during dispute. Personal belongings could be removed within a reasonable window, 14 days standard. After that, access required arrangement. The locksmith arrived an hour later, tools in hand. We waited outside while he worked methodically. Front door, back door, barn side entry. Dad paced the porch, face red but words running out. Mom sat on the steps staring at the fields. Travis muttered under breath, kicking gravel. Brooke cried quietly, Ethan rubbing her back uselessly. New keys got handed to me. Old ones no longer fit. Marcus reminded everyone again of the timeline for vacating contact info if needed, then left with a nod. Victoria stayed a moment longer, touching my arm before driving off. I stood on the porch alone as they gathered boxes from inside, voices low and strained. The weeks that followed brought sharp changes for everyone. Dad and Mom ended up selling off a small corner lot on the edge of the property, the one with road frontage that brought a quick buyer. The money covered moving costs and first month's rent on a modest house in the nearest town. They downsized to 2 bedrooms, stored extra furniture, and adjusted to quieter evenings without acreage to manage. Brooke postponed the wedding indefinitely. Vendors got canceled, deposits lost here and there. The financial mess from the blocked transfer and Ethan's repossession hit harder than expected. Bills stacked up, plans unraveled. Ethan packed his things one weekend and left for a job offer in another state. He told her it was too much uncertainty, that he needed stability sooner. Brooke moved back in with Mom and Dad, temporarily taking online courses while working part-time retail. Travis picked up more hours at a local equipment dealership, sharing an apartment with a coworker to split costs. The ideas he'd had about running the ranch faded fast. He dealt with daily commutes, tighter budgets, no buffer from family property anymore. I worked with Marcus to finalize my options under the trust. After reviews and appraisals, I chose to sell my controlling interest through a closed listing. The buyer was a neighboring operation looking to expand grazing land. Proceeds came through clean, more than enough to clear any lingering ties. I used the funds to buy a small condo closer to the city, paid in full, no mortgage hanging over me. The rest went into investments and an emergency fund I'd never had before. For the first time, every dollar I earned stayed mine. Messages started coming soon after the sale closed. Mom sent long texts about how hard the adjustment was, asking if I'd reconsider visiting. Dad left voicemails blaming lawyers for complicating family matters, saying pride got in the way of keeping everyone together. Travis texted accusations about tearing apart what generations built. Brooke sent tearful voice notes calling me cold for letting the ranch go to strangers after everything. I read them once, then stopped opening the threads. Calls went unanswered, numbers blocked when they persisted from new ones. Relatives who reached out got polite, but short replies. I was focusing on my own life now. Victoria checked in occasionally, the only contact I kept open. She understood the boundary without needing explanation. Looking back, the turning point wasn't any single notice or lock change. It was realizing that pouring years into keeping others comfortable didn't earn respect. It just taught them to expect more. Love mixed with constant taking wears thin. When gratitude never shows and credit goes elsewhere, walking away isn't cruel. It's the only way to stop the pattern. Choosing myself didn't harm them in the end. It forced everyone to stand on actual choices instead of assumptions. Some bridges burn so new paths can open. If there's one thing I hope sticks for anyone hearing this, it's simple. Your effort deserves recognition. When it's not given freely, protecting your peace isn't selfish. Sometimes it's the healthiest thing you can do for you, and even for them in the long run.